We're all good.
Are you good in the room? Okay. Okay, you're good to go.
Mr. Generou? Mr. Generou? Are you good if I start? Yeah. You're good to go? I just want to give you some time to... You're all good? Welcome. All right. Comité permanent des transports de
Welcome to this meeting of the Transport, Infrastructure and Communities Committee. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person or remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants of this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted.
Situation and in light of the recommendations from public health authorities as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on January 28, 2022, to remain healthy and safe, the following is recommended for all those attending the meeting in person. Anyone with symptoms should participate by Zoom and not attend this meeting in person. Everyone must maintain 2-meter physical distancing, whether seated or standing. Everyone must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room. It is recommended in the strongest possible terms that members wear their masks at all times, including when seated. Non-medical masks, which provide better clarity over cloth masks, are available in the room. Everyone present must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizer at the room's entrance. Committee rooms are cleaned before and after each meeting. To maintain this, everyone is encouraged to clean surfaces such as the desk, the chair, and microphone with the provided disinfectant wipes when vacating or taking their seat. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, March 3, 2022, the committee is meeting to study Canada's preparedness to respond to Russian threats to Canadian waters, ports, and airspace. Today, we have appearing before committee the Honourable Omar Al-Gabra, Minister of Transport, as well as the Deputy Minister Michael Keenan, who will be appearing for the first half of today's meeting. For the second half of today's meeting, we have from the Department of Transport, Marine Policy, Mr. Marc-Yves Bertin. We have Julie Gascon, the Director General, Marine Safety and Security, as well as Nicholas Robinson, the Director General, Civil Aviation, as well as from NAV Canada, Ben Girard, the Vice President and Chief of Operations, and Mr. Jonathan Bagg, the Director, Stakeholder and Industry Relations. Witnesses, thank you for appearing before committee today. Minister, it is always a pleasure to have you here to answer our questions. It's good to see you this morning. And I know that our members are eagerly looking forward to asking you questions. So with that in mind, Minister, I turn the mic over to you for your opening remarks.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for inviting me to be back and meet with you once again. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am joining you from the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm pleased to be joined by, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, Michael Keenan, the Deputy Minister of Transport, Julie Gascon, Director General of Marine Safety and Security, Marc-Yves Bertin, Director General of Marine Policy, and Nicholas Robinson, Director General of Civil Aviation. Mr. Chair, let me start out by saying that Russia must be held accountable for its aggression against Ukraine.
Russia must be held accountable for its actions.
To President Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the government has taken strong and decisive action. Today, I'll be speaking about measures Canada has taken to restrict and respond to Russian aircraft in Canadian waters, ports, and airspace. As Minister of Transport, I'm dedicated to making Canada's transportation system safer and more secure. This includes during times of crisis, as we are witnessing with Russia's attacks on Ukraine. Canadians are outraged by these acts of aggression. This violation of Ukraine's independence and sovereignty has caused unnecessary loss of life, a massive refugee displacement and incredible hardship for the Ukrainian people. Canada stands with Ukraine and will continue to do what is necessary to respond to Russia's unprovoked and unjustifiable attacks on Ukraine. Nous continuerons de
We will continue to support Ukraine.
We announced the closure of Canada's territorial airspace to all Russian aircraft. On March 16, we also announced the closure of Canada's territorial airspace to all Belarusian aircraft. This means we prohibited the operation of Russian or Belarusian-owned, chartered, or operated aircraft over Canada, including in the airspace above Canada's territorial waters. A few days after our announcement, the United States followed suit and closed its airspace to Russia, which essentially rendered transatlantic service by Russian airlines non-viable. As of today, approximately 40 countries have suspended Russian air access. I want to take a moment to highlight some developments that occurred since these measures were implemented. On the same day that Canada closed its territorial airspace to Russian aircraft, Russian Aeroflot Flight 111 entered Canadian airspace while en route from Miami to Moscow. And just a few days after that, a private aircraft carrying 2 Russian nationals landed in Yellowknife. While the investigation of Aeroflot is ongoing, Transport Canada's investigation found that the aircraft that landed in Yellowknife operated against restrictions. $24,000 in fines were then issued to those responsible. In addition to these incidents, just before our Notice to Airmen, or NOTAM, came into force on February 27th, a Russian-operated Antonov cargo plane landed at Toronto Pearson. The aircraft has been grounded and prohibited from departing due to the ban on Russian-owned aircraft in Canadian airspace, as it would be in violation of the NOTAM. These incidents are taken extremely seriously, and we will not hesitate to take immediate enforcement action should further incidents of non-compliance with the restrictions occur. I also announced that we've banned Russian-owned or registered vessels in Canadian internal waters and at our ports. As with our airspace restrictions, we will not hesitate to enforce any breaches of these measures. In addition, we've strongly condemned Russia's action at the International Civil Aviation Organization and the International Maritime Organization. We will continue to call out any actions that are not in line with international obligations. Mr. Chair, in conclusion, just want to say by closing our airspace, ports, and waters to Russian and Belarusian-owned controlled aircraft and Russian-owned or controlled vessels, we have acted quickly to find ways to hold Russia accountable. We have already shown that we will take swift action to punish those who violate these measures. Beyond action against Russia and Belarus, we are also taking measures to support Ukraine. Nous prenons des actions.
We are also taking measures to support Ukraine.
Memorandum of Understanding with Ukraine to recognize their certificates of competency issued in accordance with the International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping for Seafarers. This will permit a Ukrainian seafarer with a Canadian work permit to serve on board a Canadian flagged vessel. And we will continue to stand with Ukraine. I'd like to thank the committee for its ongoing input on transportation issues, and I look forward to continuing our work together. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm concluding my opening remarks, and I look forward to the committee's question. Merci à tous. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Minister. Our first round of questions will begin with Ms. Landsman. Ms. Landsman, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Hi, Minister. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to your officials for making the time. And I commend you on the swift measures around our airspace. And I know that my colleagues will talk about things that are related to physical security. I wanted to spend some time talking about cybersecurity threats to our critical transportation infrastructure systems, or I would just say critical infrastructure. Experts have said that Russia will launch cyber attacks against Canadian, American, European financial institutions because of our response. Do you think that those threats could be extended to our transportation infrastructure, particularly our critical port infrastructure?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank my colleague for her question and really important question. Look, Transport Canada is aware of the serious threats that Russia could pose to our cybersecurity, and Transport Canada has been working closely with Public Safety, who is the lead federal department responsible for enhancing the resilience of Canada's critical infrastructure against ongoing and emerging threats through its national strategy, an action plan for cybersecurity. So absolutely, we are also collaborating with ports, with airports, with other stakeholders on ensuring that they all have plans and the support that they need to strengthen and enhance their cybersecurity.
Engaged the department in the last 26 days since the Russian aggression began this time in Ukraine on any specific measures around enhancing cybersecurity, whether it be at our airports, our ports, or on any critical infrastructure in Canada. Transportation infrastructure, I should say.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, we are engaged with transportation institutions, including airports and ports and others, on ensuring, and including, by the way, Transport Canada itself, on ensuring that our safeguards, our security, including cybersecurity, is maintained and is prepared for current and emerging threats.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, the limited studies that exist indicate that ransomware attacks in the transport industry in North America, not just Canada, there is no specific data that I was able to find on Canada, increased by 186%. That's just one of the ways, one of the aspects of cyber attacks. And that was between June 2020 and June 2021. And we know since there has been ransomware attacks on systems in the GTA where you and I are from. And I know that Canada's falling behind its peers on cybersecurity and investment in cybersecurity. And is that a concern for the protection of our infrastructure? And what's the department advocating for as part of the limited funding that's available in comparison to our allies for cybersecurity?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do want to agree, and I repeat that the increased risk to our cybersecurity is certainly a concern of ours, and we've been working collaboratively along with Public Safety, but also the Communication Security Establishment, the CSE, and our partners. So we are regularly sharing and distributing communications and guidance that is issued by the Communications Security Establishment with ports, airports, and other institutions. So we're all monitoring it. Undoubtedly, the risks continue to evolve and increase. And that's why we want to make sure that all critical transportation infrastructure institutions are prepared and ready.
I'll stop after this one question. Is there a standard, Minister, or regulatory requirement about how much time, money, or resources are dedicated to cybersecurity in any one of our critical transportation infrastructure networks under your purview?
Mr. Chair, we regularly assess the cybersecurity plans that institutions in the critical infrastructure in the transportation sector have. We assess them, we evaluate them, we provide feedback to institutions. We act as a resource for those critical infrastructure to make sure that we feel that they have the highest standard of protection against any potential threats.
A requirement, a legislative requirement, a regulatory requirement for those under your purview to spend a certain amount of money or provide a certain amount of training or take this more seriously given the increased threat and potential threat from foreign actors?
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the question, and I'm not aware of having a requirement to dedicate a percentage of spending on security, whether it's cyber or otherwise. Having said that, it is important that we assess and evaluate ongoing plans that institutions have. And if the committee wants to study the current standard and offer recommendations, we would be more than happy to support that study and work with them on that.
Thank you, Ms. Landsman. The next 6 minutes goes to Mr. Iacono. Mr. Iacono, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Minister. And I thank the other witnesses who are also here with you today. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you for the hard work that you're doing with this crisis in Ukraine. So first of all, Minister, apart from the sanctions, the monetary sanctions referred to earlier, what other kinds of sanctions, if a Russian aircraft were to violate this ban, what would there be? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank my colleague for that question.
To the Canadian aviation regulations, Transport Canada can issue administrative monetary penalties or fines for incidents of non-compliance with the NOTAM. As I mentioned in my opening remarks for that investigation that occurred on the chartered private jet, we imposed a significant amount of financial fines. So corporations that are convicted of violation and airspace restrictions can be subjected to a fine up to $15,000.
Thank you, Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. But what happens in a case where an airline is sanctioned, as you say, with a monetary sanction, but they don't pay it? What procedure would be undertaken at that time by Canada?
Operators who do not comply with Canadian rules, including payment of fines, could be subjected to consequences. Some of them could go as far as rejecting their permits to land in Canadian ports or airports, to fly over Canadian airspace. So there are severe consequences to those operators who are not in compliance with Canadian rules.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. And in a case where an aircraft enters our airspace but never lands on Canadian soil, how would Canada react to such a situation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As is happening right now, I mentioned the Russian Aeroflot Flight 111. There's an ongoing investigation, and that's what will happen under normal circumstances. So a flight does not land but violates the rules. Transport Canada will initiate an investigation, and we'll do our best to collect evidence and testimonies and understand what happened. And based on the findings of that investigation, Transport Canada will make decisions about consequences, including the imposition of fines or other measures.
Merci.
Thank you. Minister, what other country or countries have implemented the same kind of ban?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I said in my opening remarks, there's around 40 countries. I can go through some of them if you want. Here's the list that I have in front of me: Albania, Austria, Belgium, Bermuda, Bulgaria, Canada, Croatia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, and I could go on, Mr. Chair. There's a long list of countries here that we'd be happy to table with committee.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Minister. Has Russia taken any retaliatory measures? And if so, which ones?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Russia did end up banning the flights of or the operations of several countries' flights. So we understand that Canada is on that list, and it's retaliated to Canadian operators.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Monsieur le Ministre.
Minister, there were approximately how many flights from Russia that were landing in Canada in the past?
So, Mr. Chair, there were many flights based on our assessment that used to cross Canadian airspace, up to between 80 to 140 flights a week. Now, the majority of them did not land in Canada, but they typically flew through Canadian airspace on their way to other destinations. So those were a significant number of flights that now are no longer able to.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Yacano. And next, we have Mr. Barsalou Duval. You have 6 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Minister. Thank you for being with us today. In your opening comments, you spoke about a certain number of cases that were in the press of flights that came through Canadian airspace after the ban came into effect. I'd like to know if, apart from those that have already been talked about in the press, have there been any other flights come into our airspace?
There have not been any reported violation of the rules other than the ones I mentioned in my opening remarks.
Merci.
Thank you, Minister. And perhaps also I'm trying to better understand how things happen, but I understood that there's a flight that was supposed to land in Yellowknife, but that wasn't able to get to the destination. That was the one that was carted. Perhaps I didn't quite understand the normal procedures, but we stop a flight from landing if they're not authorized to be in our airspace. But in the case of the I believe it's, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name, Aeroflot, that flight was heading where? I'd like to understand what happened there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Aeroflot 111 that I referred to was coming from south and heading to Russia, to Moscow. I think it was Miami, heading to Moscow, and it typically under normal circumstances would be crossing Canadian airspace, and the NAV Canada issued a warning, but the pilot claimed humanitarian reasons. So NAV Canada allowed or permitted that pilot, but we have looked into it and we now are investigating how it happened and why it happened. And action will be taken. But this was not according to the rules, not according to the notice to airmen that was issued by our government. So that's why it never happened again. And I had conversations with NAV Canada about how that incident had happened.
Merci.
Thank you. If I understand correctly, if an aircraft wants to fly over Canada and they're not following the rules, just saying that it's a humanitarian flight will get them out of that difficulty? Is there some way that we ensure that it truly is a humanitarian case or not?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand that NAV Canada will be attending the second half of this committee, and I'm sure they'll be able to answer the committee members' questions about those rules. I just want to be clear. The notice to airmen issued in response to the Russian aggression against Ukraine did not include any exemptions for humanitarian or any other purpose. So that's why there's an ongoing investigation about what happened and how it happened. I've had conversations with NAV Canada about this, and I know you will be asking them questions today. The one thing that I could say that it had never happened, it's never happened again, and I'm confident that it will never happen again.
Merci.
Thank you. There are many security specialists who've shared their concerns that we might see attacks on our infrastructure in terms of transportation. But it's recognized that there have been many attacks against infrastructure that have been carried out by China or Russia. And I wonder if there's been any attacks on strategic transport infrastructure since these limitations have been imposed on overflights and on the movement of Russian ships.
Mr. Chair, as I explained in an earlier question, Transport Canada is working with public safety, with communications, security establishment, with our partners in the critical transportation infrastructure field to ensure that they are prepared, that their cybersecurity is enhanced and is ready for ongoing and potential threats to our establishment. We take the security, cybersecurity of our infrastructure extremely seriously, and we're working with our partners to ensure that they are ready and prepared.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Minister. If you can't answer my question, is it because you're not aware of the number of attacks, or that you're perhaps not informed of when there are attacks?
Mr. Chair, we typically avoid talking about operational issues in public to ensure that our partners are operating safely and securely. I can assure you that if there are any incidents that are worthy of public reports, that the committee members and Canadians would know about them. But there are also operational reasons why we cannot talk about the preparation plan and what is happening right now.
Thank you very much, Minister. Next round of questioning goes to Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and good to see you again, Minister. Thanks for engaging with the committee on this important topic. My first question goes to the reciprocal ban that Russia has placed on Canadian flights in its airspace. I'm wondering if you know what impact this is having on Canadian flights, particularly those to East and Central Asia, and if you've had conversations with carriers like Air Canada about the impact of that reciprocal ban.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to my colleague for that question. Indeed, it has had an impact on Canadian flights that are heading towards Central Asia or East Asia, namely Korea and India. And certainly we've had conversations with Canadian operators, including Air Canada, and they've had to reroute many of all of their flights that typically would fly over Russia. So, for example, direct flights to India now are going through Europe, namely Ireland. Yes, and that is adding a little bit extra time and extra cost. But I know that operators and I know that travelers themselves understand what's at stake, and I want to thank them for their patience and their collaboration.
Safer Skies Forum is going to be held later this month. I'm wondering if you will be participating, and if so, what Canada's contribution will be to ensuring safe commercial aviation in Eastern Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to my colleague for this important question. The Safer Skies initiative was born out of the unspeakable tragedy that happened to Flight PS 752 that was shot by the Iranian military. And Canada is now a world leader in enhancing civil aviation security. And we've been working along with our partners at the International Civil Aviation Agency, ICAO, and others. We've put in place measures to report potential risks and threats to civil aviation. And to directly answer the question, we've actually at the beginning and prior to the start of the invasion, given the intelligence and the information that we have, we've actually imposed a NOTAM over territories of Ukraine to ensure that civil aviation operators are aware of the risks of flying over there.
Good segue into my next question. Now, Transport Canada's Conflict Zone Information Office issues warnings to air carriers about the risks of operating in conflict zones, and you've prohibited airlines, as you just mentioned, from operating in Ukrainian airspace and advised against flying in Belarus. But there's no advisory or prohibition for Russian airspace. And while Canadian flights have been banned by Russia, this information from the Conflict Zone Information Office is also important for other carriers in other countries to assess risk. Is it safe for commercial flights to operate in Russian airspace at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And look, there are all kinds of considerations. However, the office mandate is to assess the potential of conflict, military conflict, and risks on security for those flights. And the recommendations that they come up with is purely based on the information and intelligence gathered by Canada and our partners. And while there are other considerations to avoid or for traveling over Russian airspace, the risk that the office comes up with is purely based on the risk of military conflict.
Thank you, Minister. Moving on to Aeroflot Flight 111, there's been some discussion at this meeting about that situation. Now, I understand that it was declared a humanitarian flight by the pilot. Are there any consequences for falsely declaring a flight a humanitarian flight?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there may be, yes. That's why I said there's an ongoing investigation, and based on the outcome of the investigation, Transport Canada will take action. So it could include consequences based on the investigation.
If I understand this correctly, the first Aeroflot flight entered Canadian airspace. It was asked by Canadian Air Traffic Control to take a different route as per the NOTAM that was issued. It announced that it was a humanitarian flight, and it was allowed to proceed through our airspace. Now, immediately following that, there were 2 more Aeroflot flights that tried to enter Canadian airspace and were redirected by American air traffic controllers. So I'm just wondering how American air traffic control is able to enforce the rules related to Canadian airspace seemingly better than Canadian agencies are.
Very quick response, please, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I know that NAV Canada is coming in the second half of this meeting, but let me just say that typically U.S. also navigators or would also raise awareness to any flights prior to entering Canadian space about the NOTAM. So that is the way our system operates. So Canadian air traffic controllers would notify flights of any NOTAM issued by the U.S. and vice versa.
Thank you very much, Minister. Our next 5 minutes goes to Mr. Moise. Mr. Moise, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we know that economic sanctions are an important part of the response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so maybe you can speak to the sanctions that are under the domain of your department in terms of shipping, ports, and the airspace. Is there a dollar estimate or an economic impact in the short term, long term, and do you feel that's enough and that it's working?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an important question, and in my opening remarks, I highlighted the range of measures that Transport Canada has put in place, from banning Russian and Belarusian aircraft operator and owned flights from entering Canadian airspace, and also banning Russian-owned and flagged vessels from entering Canadian waters. This is part and parcel of a comprehensive sanction plan that Canada has imposed on Russia in response to its unprovoked attack. It is done also in consultation and discussions with our allies. Canada is seen to be taking a global leadership role in imposing these measures. And we are doing this because not only it will have a significant economic impact on Russia, but it's the moral right thing to do. So we led with that, as we are still studying and measuring the impact that it's having on Russia. But we know that it is the moral right thing to do, and we know that it will have an impact, particularly when coordinated with allies.
That you're aware of at this point, or that you want to speak to?
I missed the first half of.
Sorry, there's no specific dollar value in terms of economic impact in the short or medium term.
Look, it's evolving, so I can't give you a number that I am not 100% accurate of. It is evolving, it's changing, but we know that if you look at the overall measures, it has had a crippling impact on Russian economy. We're seeing the ruble in a significant downfall, a decline. We're seeing economic activities facing significant barriers. So we know that these measures are having a real impact on the Russian economy.
Sure. Okay. Let's switch to Canadian shipping. In Russia, or in the Black Sea, Russia's certainly shown a disregard for international shipping, and the NATO Shipping Center has warned that there's a high risk of collateral damage to civilian shipping in the northwest part of the Black Sea. And there's been a couple of instances of shipping from NATO countries, one being the Estonian-owned cargo ship that was sunk off the coast of Odessa in early March, and as well as the bomb that hit the Turkish-owned ship off the coast of Odessa at the similar timing. So have Canadian commercial shipping interests been directed to avoid the northwest portion of the Black Sea?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are sharing the information that we have with operators. We have had a session at the International Marine Organization, the IMO Council, where we've called for the establishment of a safe maritime corridor to allow for the evacuation of merchant ships and seafarers from the conflict area, and asked the Secretary General of the IMO to collaborate with relevant parties and experts to support the implementation of these corridors.
Okay. Are there any currently any Canadian shipping that is happening in that portion of the Black Sea that you're aware of?
I'll ask my colleague Julie Gascon to respond to that question.
Where's Julie?
Julie's not here. We're having some audio issue. Pardon us.
I apologize. The Director General of Marine Safety and Security is having an audio problem, but I think what she would have said is the following: that throughout this crisis, Transport Canada has been in close contact with Canadian flagged with Canadian shipping companies that operate internationally, and advising them on an almost regular basis on the threat environment. And because there have been some Canadian companies that have actually been in Russian ports during this crisis, and not in the Black Sea, but in other Russian ports. And we've been encouraging them to be vigilant and to limit their exposure to Russian ports as much as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keenan. Thank you very much, Mr. Moise. Next, we have Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome once again, Minister, for being with us today in our Transport Committee. Minister, we all understand, of course, the gravity of the situation in Ukraine and dire consequences for the people living there. And certainly we understand the necessity of doing or taking action as we have in the transport sector. And, of course, the potential impact of the supply chain on the economy. And when I look at the shipping industry and the importance to our economy and to both coastlines, I guess, in the north and the east and west, there are many, many ports that rely on shipping, of course, and obviously are going to be impacted with this ban. So, Minister, I'll ask you, how do we plan to enforce this ban? And will the Coast Guard be deployed in the event of an incursion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to my colleague. It's good to see him again. When the enforcement was approved by Global Affairs Canada, the actions to monitor and enforce these measures are dealt with or managed on a case-by-case basis. So partners such as the Canadian Coast Guard are certainly instrumental in managing the enforcement, but each case is assessed on its own merit, and the response will be driven by the assessment.
So, Minister, we heard, of course, in the airline sector where there was a problem. So, have we, or are you aware of any incursions the ban since the ban came into force in the marine sector? And if so, how many, and how did Transport Canada respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There has been no incursion since the order has come into effect. So,
Minister, you know, when I think about the many ports that surround Newfoundland and Labrador and Atlantic Canada and the eastern seaboard, the number of ships, of course, that we see traveling through major ports like Halifax and St. John's and other ports in Atlantic Canada. I think about a company back in Bonavista Beer and Trinity in my riding, Icewater Seafoods, for example, that banned the import of Russian cod, not permitting ships to deliver that kind of product to supply important food source of cod, of course, and which creates 200 plus jobs in this small facility. So how do you see this kind of ban further impacting companies, fish companies, and other kinds of companies in Atlantic Canada?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I stated earlier, these actions were necessary and are still necessary in response to the unprovoked aggression by Russia. And these actions and these measures are driven by doing the right thing morally, the right thing economically. Of course, we are assessing and monitoring the potential impact that it may have on our supply chains, on our industries here at home. And we will continue to work with partners on assessing that impact. But I can tell you, I have not had any stakeholder or any private business come and says that these measures are unnecessary. There's obviously always sensitivities to ensuring that our supply chains are maintained, but everyone understands the imperative behind these measures.
Minister, yeah, I totally agree, of course, the importance of these measures. Minister, have similar bans ever been implemented before by Transport Canada? If so, when and under what circumstances?
Very short answer, please, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that in 2007, we had similar bans against Burma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Thank you very much, Minister. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou.
Next, we have Mr. Barcelou Duval. You have 2.5 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Minister, in an earlier response, you said that you couldn't. The interpreter regrets, but the sound's cutting out for Mr. Barcelou Duval's feed.
En quoi, en fait, ça compromet la sécurité nationale?
How would it compromise national security to say that attacks occurred?
Sorry, so part of the interpretation was cut off, but Mr. Chair, let me try to respond. I said that has there been any serious attacks that are worthy of reporting to the public, that we would and will be reporting it. So it is really important to remain vigilant and prudent and prepared.
Merci pour votre réponse.
Thank you for your answer. That brings me some clarity. My next question concerns the Northern Territories. The three governments of the territories in the Canadian North have shared their concerns. If ever there were to be a Russian attack on Canada, it could come through the Arctic, and they're concerned as to the state of readiness. They've asked for a meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau, and they would like to participate in the Council of the Federation. So I'd like to know what the government, or how the government's reacted to those concerns and to that request.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Arctic sovereignty is incredibly important to our government, and I know it is important to Canadians and important to members of this committee. So our government has been and will continue to assert our sovereignty in the North by investing in critical infrastructure, by partnering with the territorial government, and we will continue to do so. We take our partnership with their territorial governments extremely seriously, and I can tell you from Transport Canada's perspective, we have dedicated significant amount of our national trade corridor infrastructure investment to the North. So this is part and parcel of our assertion of our sovereignty in the North.
Savez-vous que votre gouvernement
Malheureusement,
Unfortunately, you have no more time, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Thank you, Minister. Next.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, my next questions are around the shipping-related sanctions. I'm wondering how many Russian-owned or registered ships and fishing vessels does the government expect will be affected by the sanctions that have been announced?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were monitoring when the order came into place. We were monitoring 4 vessels, and those vessels were directed to avoid entering Canadian waters, and they all got diverted. So we are constantly monitoring and broadcasting our orders to ensure that all operators are aware of the orders.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Since the ban came into effect, has the government observed any Russian-owned or registered ships transferring their cargo to ships sailing under different countries' flags in order to complete delivery of the products they're carrying?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, we've seen, as I mentioned, some ships be diverted based on our orders. So it is the ban restricts Russian-owned and Russian-flagged vessels from entering Canadian waters. And I can tell you that as of right now, no incursion has occurred, and all the vessels that were attempting to enter had been diverted.
Thank you, Minister. My next question is around how the government determines the ownership structure and whether a government is communicating that information to ports so that they can effectively enforce this ban. I know that the ownership structure of the shipping companies can be quite complex, and often shipping companies run under flags of different countries for tax purposes or what have you. Is Transport Canada communicating that information effectively to ports so they're able to implement the ban?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that question. And indeed, my colleague brings up a really relevant and important point. Yes, sometimes some of these ownerships are highly complicated, so we are regularly communicating with ports, with shippers, with operators, to not only share the letter of the ban, but also the spirit of the ban, and we're constantly evaluating based on the information that we have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach, and thank you, Minister. The next 5 minutes goes to Ms. Landsman. Ms. Landsman, the floor is yours.
I'm probably going to split my time with Mr. Jenner, but I've got a couple questions, Minister. I just wanted to change gears. You talked a lot about the notice to airmen that was issued on February 27th. How long does it take to issue a notice from discussion to operationalizing it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It can be done very quickly. I think the time is mostly spent on the analysis of the type of NOTAM, but it can be the order can be issued very quickly.
So you would say immediately?
Immediately. Obviously, there's still paperwork necessary, but there would be hours. But as I said, the time is mostly spent on the analysis of the nature of the notice and the type of the notice.
Is that the primary way to communicate to airmen to watch out for this, to help you with the potential threat?
NOTAM is used for a variety of purposes, and it is done for enhancing safety and security. And when it's issued, then it's shared with NAV Canada, and then NAV Canada has the ability and the responsibility of sharing it with operators.
So, Minister, would you communicate that first, or would the notice go out first?
For example, in this situation with the Russian NOTAM, we had given NAV Canada a heads up before it was issued public, so they are prepared. So they have a lead time, but we would issue it publicly, and then NAV Canada would enforce it.
So do you think the system is agile enough if you felt that you needed to communicate that publicly first, and the NOTAM to go out after?
I think the system is quite agile, and we've demonstrated that in this situation. Again, I would invite and welcome the committee's advice on this, but I feel that the system has demonstrated its agility.
I'll take it. It's a pleasure to have you here before committee, and appreciate you answering most of the questions yourself. I do want to give you the opportunity, though. At the beginning of your comments, you talked about the grounding of 2 Russian civilians at the Yellowknife Airport, and didn't go into a lot of specifics of who they were, what they were doing there. From the briefing that we've received, they looked like they were on an Arctic expedition. However, I think Canadians would like to know that they're not a threat. Are they still there? What's happening with that particular flight?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to my colleague for that question. Let me be clear. The investigation that was generated because of this incident was not because of the individuals per se. It was because it appeared that the jet had violated the terms of the NOTAM. And the terms of the NOTAM bans any flights that is operated or under the control of Russians.
Minister, I just want to give you the opportunity to clarify that there's no threat to Canadians right now with those individuals or that plane being up in Yellowknife. You can say that?
And yes, I can say that,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, and I can also say that the plane has left, and I'm not going to comment on where the individuals are, but there are no threats to Canadians and Canadian security.
Well, I appreciate that, Minister, because I think a lot of Canadians, when you mentioned that at the beginning of your opening comments, would be concerned or wondering what was occurring. So again, wanted to give you that opportunity to do that. You did mention also in your opening comments call out actions and punish and invoke punishments. And just curious as to what types of punishments that you perceive would be relevant in certain situations like those.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I said in my opening remarks, in some of my answers, there are monetary fines that can be applied and have been applied in the situation of that private jet. They could go as high as $15,000. They could be directed against a company, against individuals, against the pilot. So there are several fines that can be imposed, and then consequences if those fines are not paid.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you very much, Mr. Genereux. To conclude panel 1 today, we have Mr. Chahal. Mr. Chahal, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us today and all the guests with you. Minister, you've talked a lot about NOTAM. Can you specifically tell us what NOTAM is, Notice to Airmen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Notice to Airmen, as I said earlier, is an instrument that Transport Canada uses to guide or advise or order airplanes and drone operators to enhance safety and security of those in the air or those on the ground.
And why was the NOTAM issued on February 27th?
Mr. Chair, this was part of our comprehensive, decisive action in response to the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And given the heightened security situation and the tension and the military, the hostility that Russia has demonstrated or exhibited towards Ukraine, we decided to ban Russian owned and operated flights from entering Canadian airspace.
Minister, how can we ensure that Russian aircraft do not enter Canadian airspace?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is done first through communication. NAV Canada has the mandate and responsibility of directing traffic in Canadian airspace. And if there's a violation of these orders, NAV Canada has protocols to react to any potential violation. And as I said, I know that NAV Canada is coming afterwards, so they can probably do a good job. I'm sure they will do a good job explaining those protocols.
Now, with those protocols in place, and did we see a reactionary response to the NOTAM from Russian or the Belarusans in response?
Mr. Chair, as I again said earlier, I'm aware that Russia has reciprocated and banned Canadian flights from entering Russian airspace.
What effects will this have, the Russian response and reciprocation to Canadian operators?
Mr. Chair, there are flights that are managed by or run by Canadian operators like Air Canada that typically would fly over Russian airspace to get to Korea or India. Those flights now have been diverted. Yes, they're taking longer routes and it's adding costs, but I know that Air Canada and others understand why, and they've done their best to divert their traffic. And I know that air travelers themselves also understood and understand why this is happening, and they understand and have accepted and acknowledged the reason for it.
Thank you, Minister, for your responses today. Mr. Chair, I think that's it for my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chahal, and thank you, Minister and Deputy Minister, for your testimony this morning. It's always a pleasure to host you, and we very much appreciate your time. I will now suspend the meeting for 2 minutes, at which point we will resume for panel 2. So, Minister and Deputy Minister, please feel free to log off at your convenience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the opportunity. And hopefully I look forward to doing it one time soon in person.
We'd love to have you.
Thank you.
today are with the people of Ukraine. NAV Canada is the not-for-profit corporation that owns and operates the world's first privatized air navigation system, ensuring the safest, most efficient movement of aircraft from the Pacific to the Arctic to the mid-Atlantic, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. NAV Canada operates the world's second largest ANS. To support our 45,000 customers, we employ 4,000 people and are deploying groundbreaking technologies to keep the skies safe. Safety is why we exist, and our safety record is one of the best in the world. NAV Canada thanks the committee for its invitation to address its concerns with respect to the recent restrictions imposed on Russian aircraft entering Canadian airspace. In the normal course, NAV Canada's capacity to act in this matter is very limited. More specifically, in the context of our mandate to operate the civil air navigation system in compliance with ICAO standards as stipulated in our governing legislation, we do not have authority to choose who may or may not operate in our airspace. Our mission is to ensure the aircraft fly safely and efficiently in our airspace by ensuring safe separation between aircraft when restrictions are put in place through a notice to airman or NOTAM. All pilots are required to comply with them. The safety and security of the global air navigation system depends on thousands of aircraft and their pilots following thousands of NOTAMs that exist at any given time. Practically speaking, NAV Canada does not have a way to physically prevent entry into our airspace. We are not responsible for enforcement actions against any aircraft operator that violates a NOTAM. If a pilot disregards or violates a NOTAM, NAV Canada has but one course of action. That is to report the offending aircraft to the appropriate authorities while ensuring that the offending aircraft does not impact the safety of all other aircraft in the airspace. Even with a NOTAM in place, NAV Canada requires ministerial authority to deny the offender air traffic control clearances. Even with the specific authority to deny clearances, it does not guarantee that a pilot will comply and may instead choose to enter the airspace. In terms of reporting the offender, existing procedures require that NAV Canada advises Transport Canada. It is up to Transport Canada to initiate an investigation and impose whatever penalties may be appropriate. If any physical engagement or real-time enforcement is required, Transport Canada may choose to engage the Department of National Defence. On the morning of Sunday, February 27th, 2022, the Minister of Transport made the unprecedented declaration that Canada's airspace was closed to all Russian aircraft. Transport Canada then authorized the issuance of a NOTAM restricting Russian aircraft from Canadian airspace, and NAV Canada issued the NOTAM by midday. Adding complexity to the situation was the fact that the FAA, as the operator of the adjoining airspace, had not yet put in place any restrictions. That afternoon, Aeroflot Flight 111 departed Miami International Airport and approached Canadian airspace. The FAA indicated to a NAV Canada controller that the pilot was aware of the NOTAM, but claimed they had authorization to enter Canadian airspace on the basis of declaring itself a humanitarian flight. NAV Canada does not, however, determine the validity of these declarations. That is a function of Transport Canada. It is important to note that even with the NOTAM as initially issued, any aircraft declaring itself a humanitarian, medevac, or other type of emergency flight would, according to existing processes and procedures, be given access to the airspace and ATC clearances in accordance with international civil aviation protocols. NAV Canada immediately notified Transport Canada of Aeroflot 111's humanitarian declaration and entry into Canadian airspace in accordance with approved processes and procedures. On Monday, February 28th, Transport Canada subsequently provided written authority to NAV Canada to deny ATC clearances to all Russian flights, including humanitarian, medevac, and search and rescue flights. An exemption remained for aircraft with an in-flight emergency, which would be directed to land at the nearest facility. We are proud at NAV Canada of the work our employees did to quickly develop, educate, and safely implement the new procedures that operationalize the new restrictions. In summary, Mr. Chair, our primary responsibility is to manage the airspace above Canada to ensure the safe transit of all aircraft through that airspace. We are confident that all actions taken by NAV Canada and its personnel with respect to this matter were done professionally and to the full extent allowable by all of the respective governing authorities, legislation, regulations, procedures, and policies. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Girard. Our first round of questioning, and I can say this now with authority, goes to Mr. Dowdle. Mr. Dowdle, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our guests here as well. I just want to say that it was great to see the minister here once again, and I was in his comments when he said that there's sanctions that are working and hopefully crippling Russia a bit. I think that's good news. But the collateral damage also is that some of those are crippling some people here in Canada as well. So, but before I preface my question here, I just want to be clear that each and everyone that's reached out to my office, whether it's in the agribusiness or a farmer, is supportive of the sanctions, but there are deep concerns. So my riding is in Simcoe Grade, which happens to be a huge agricultural base. And right now, farmers, as you know, spring is here. We're getting ready to get the crops in the ground. And part of that involves getting fertilizer in the ground as well. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, that Russia supplies much of the world's monoammonium phosphate fertilizer, which is critical for Canada's food production. And Canada right now does not produce any. And I've been contacted by several people in my riding, end users and agribusiness as well, concerned about the impact of the restrictions of the ban on Russian manufacturers, especially when it comes to these fertilizers. Simply put, if we do not get fertilizer in the ground soon, the fall crop yields across Canada will be much reduced. And getting fertilizer is a long process. Quantities are ordered long before Russia invaded Ukraine, and often these are paid for long in advance. The contracts are signed and subject to large cancellation fees. Alliance AgriTurf, who happens to be in my riding and actually a large company across Canada, is an important supplier of fertilizer for Central Ontario, and they've contacted me just with concerns over the shipment of these MAP fertilizers coming into Canada. And the shipment was originally due March 15th, but Transport Canada told them that the shipment would not be allowed into Canada, so it's been pushed back to this weekend to sort, hopefully, the situation out. I'm just wondering if anyone on here can maybe provide with an update, perhaps, on the issue with fertilizer. As we know, there's not a lot everywhere else. So I just don't know if anyone on this panel could perhaps give us some guidance.
Yes, thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. I think as the member noted, this is a question that has been put to us. It's been put to the government writ large. Decisions as to how to manage requests of this nature fall under the Minister of Foreign Affairs' responsibility and to her officials. So I think in terms of any updates on the matter, it would be best posed to officials from that department, Global Affairs Canada. I'm afraid that I'm unable to provide an update on that situation.
So at this moment in time, you don't basically have an idea whether or not this cargo will be delivered?
So as I mentioned, I think it's a question that needs to be put to our colleagues at the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. That said, just stepping back for a moment, Canada-Russia trade is relatively small, but very much focused on some specific bulk commodities in the petroleum sector, chemicals, including fertilizers, as you note, amongst others. And as the minister noted previously, measures have been taken against certain commodities. With respect to fertilizers, obviously, this is something that, if chartered on a vessel that is Russian flagged can therefore find themselves affected by the vessel ban provisions. So, I think in the fullness of time, it'll be important that Canadian importers obviously remain sensitive to the prohibitions that the government has enacted to ensure that they don't run afoul of these measures.
Was it Transport Canada though that said it would not be allowed in? Is that who made the decision?
So the protocols, and I could invite one of my colleagues to speak to that, Madame Julie Gascon. But in simple terms, while the Department of Transport and other partners monitor obviously Canada's approaches, the final determination as to what to do with a vessel that has been identified is a decision that is taken by the Department of Global Affairs. These are measures that have been taken under the Special Economic Measures Act. And as you well know, these are an act that falls under the responsibility of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So in that respect, it's fair to say, actually it's appropriate to say, that the decisions are for the Minister of Foreign Affairs on the advice of her officials, but obviously in consultation with the support of other departments such as Transport Canada.
So, and I don't know if someone can elaborate perhaps on the due diligence that was done on these potential impacts on Canadian food supply, because it's going to, and certainly everyone's going to pay more. As you know, we're having a tough time now, whether inflation, we got the CP rail strike, who knows what it is people aren't getting products. And this is just another thing. The price has already increased on fertilizer 60 to 80%. And if we add a 35% duty on products, purchased months ago, means an effective doubling of the fertilizer prices, which means, it's going to be difficult for our farmers, but it's going to be difficult again once for the end user. So I'm just wondering, has there been any discussion on perhaps the impact of Canadian food supply?
15-second response, please.
Sure. I think it's fair to say that when confronted with these types of decisions, the Department of Global Affairs needs to consult with a range of departments, including transport, but other departments as well that would have a perspective to offer in terms of any commodity that may or may not be captured by a measure, or questions are being asked about a commodity and its potential effect by or the potential effects of the measures.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your answers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dowdell and Mr. Bertin. Next round of 6 minutes goes to Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to expand a bit on the question that was just asked with respect to the supply chains. And Mr. Berlin, how do you think, or how do you feel the effect on the Canadian supply chain will occur in the next couple months with what's happening right now?
Thank you very much for that question. As I was mentioning earlier, Canada-Russia trade is relatively small, and it is focused on a few commodities. I mentioned petroleum products, chemical products, iron ore, minerals, and I think from that perspective, we can see that there is therefore a potential in terms of impacts on certain commodities that are transported by vessel that is Russian flagged or Russian owned. I think from our perspective, just speaking to petroleum products, we're talking here about one of the largest commodities Canada imports from Russia. And I also mentioned, of course, fertilizers. That said, over the near to medium term, Canadian importers need to make sure that they're not contracting with operators or charters of ships that are subject to a ban. And I think the repeated communications around this, I think, provides Canadian importers with the foresight needed to organize their business dealings accordingly.
Thank you, and again, and I'm glad you brought that up about the shippers and the owners. It goes back to a question that Mr. Bachrach alluded to earlier with respect to ships that are owned by Canadian companies but are flagged under possibly Russian flag of the vessel. So, going a bit deeper into the weeds in that, how are you going to determine the ownership versus just simply the flagging of each vessel? And I guess to that same question is, what will be the definition of a Russian vessel with respect to the ownership and the flagging?
Okay. Julie? I'm going to turn the question over to my colleague, Madame Julie Gascon.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Merci, Marc-Yves. So in terms of determining the ownership of the vessel, so there's various ways. Simplest one, the vessel is owned by Russia and has a Russian flag on its stern, so that's a Russian vessel. It can be owned but registered in another country. That's also often very clear. Where sometimes the analysis needs to be a bit more in-depth is when the vessel is being chartered, partly chartered, or leased. And that's where from the Maritime Security Operations Center partners, so that's Coast Guard, the National Defense, CBSA, the RCMP, Transport Canada, and the Department of Fisheries and Ocean, we do an in-depth analysis of all of the elements that is received on this particular vessel and its cargo. And we time our analysis at the pre-arrival report, which is normally sent to the Maritime Security Operations Center. And equipped with this analysis, we provide as much detailed information as we can to our global affair colleagues who make the final determination and may request additional paperwork if there is any concern in terms of whether the vessel or any of its charterers could meet the definition under the sanction. So it is a complex operation, but supported by many departments to be able to have a thorough analysis of that vessel.
Thank you. And with respect to the amount of vessels, Russian vessels, that we see traditionally in Canadian waters, approximately how many Russian vessels will be affected by this ban? And of course, as was said earlier, giving us some kind of gauge in terms of what the supply chain or the impacts on the supply chain will be. So approximately how many Russian vessels will be affected by the ban?
So thank you. We're talking roughly about 75, just under 75 vessels. Obviously, the calls can vary according to seasonality and the commodities that they're shipped. I say that this represents roughly about 1% of all vessel calls on Canada. Now, that said, I think what's important to note is that the power of sanctions tends to be in the coordinated nature of the actions that are taken amongst Canada and other countries. They may be identical or variable, but taken together, we could see that, as the minister was noting, there's been a sizable impact on the Russian economy and its economic activities. AIS data, for example, information that we could see in terms of vessels suggests that activities at Russian ports have declined since the start of hostilities by about 40%.
Thank you. And with respect to the supply chain, I want to bounce back to that for a second, because I understand that a lot of other countries are having or are putting forward bans. Now, do you see the impacts that are happening in other countries impact the fluidity or the supply chains with Canada as well? Whether they're the same or they may not be the same?
Well, thank you again for that question. I'd say, I come back to the fact that roughly about 1% of Russian vessels, 1% of vessel calls on Canada are Russian connected for the purposes of the ban. That said, there are various measures, that have been instituted, as well as actions taken by even some of the major shipping lines. In terms of the impacts, sanctions have obviously some very material impacts in the way that supply chain actors operate, just to make sure that they don't run afoul of the various sanction regimes that exist around the world. And so what that means, therefore, is that a broad range of actors are having to scrutinize their dealings much more than previously, whether that's bankers, insurers, shippers, or what have you. Again, just to make sure that they're on the right side of the law in these contexts. So what we're seeing, obviously, is degrees of scrutiny, higher degrees of scrutiny, which can therefore lead into delays. We're seeing some reroutings, but also, obviously, as I was mentioning, a certain decline in Russian port activities.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway, and thank you very much, Mr. Bertin. Next, we have, suivant, nous avons Mr.
We have Mr. Barcelou Duval. You have 6 minutes, and you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question will be for Mr. Girard from NAV Canada. In your opening statement, talking about the Aeroflot flight, you mentioned, if I understand correctly, that there was a certain confusion regarding the status of that flight because there was no directive coming from the FAA in the United States on its declaration. So I'd like to know, I'm trying to understand, because the FAA sent you information and you had discussions with them. What checks do you carry out when there's a flight coming through Canadian airspace? Is it done with the flight, with the plane directly, or with the country of origin? Thank you for the question, Mr. Barcelona-Duval. First of all, I want to just clarify there was no confusion. What happened before the flight, and we were in discussions with Transport Canada at that time, and we asked the FAA to change the flight's route so that it would stay out of Canadian airspace. And it's at that point in time, speaking to the air traffic controller on the FAA side, said that they were aware of the NOTAM and that they had the authorization to pass because it was a humanitarian flight. So at this point in time, the regulations that were in place for air traffic controllers and that are supported as well by the OSC would be to allow the flight to enter the airspace because they had declared it to be a humanitarian flight. So the same rules apply if it was a research flight or a medevac flight. And at that point in time, these are the procedures that were in place at that point in time. So the controller did, at the time, apply the existing procedures and allowed the flight to enter in Canadian airspace in coordination with the FAA controller. So if I understand correctly, they had permission under the restrictions that were in place, but now that's something that's no longer allowed? Well, yes and no. The first NOTAM did not have any indication of how to proceed with humanitarian flights. And if we review the procedures that are mandated by the OSCE, those kinds of flights in normal times would have access to those airspaces. But since that time, as you say, the NOTAM has been clarified, and the FAA has been told to refuse access, even to humanitarian flights or medevac flights or research flights, or search and research, rather, unless there was a different opinion issued by the government. So normally, NAV Canada would allow search and rescue and humanitarian flights, and they would accept what the pilot of the flight would say, and that's what happened at that time. I understand. So normally, a flight that is being declared to be a humanitarian flight, how is that verified? I understand that NAV Canada can't do that. They take the word of the person who's flying the plane. Who can clarify that? Well, answer, not NAV Canada. I would refer that question to the people here from Transport Canada.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Mr. Chair. The way Canada defines humanitarian or emergency flights is very clear in the CANSCA Act, and that would be medevac, search and rescue, those related to the transport during an international emergency. In this case, and in our reviews, we are concerned in how Aeroflot identified in their flight plan prior to departure from the United States, declaring a humanitarian flight. We're disappointed in the operator in trying to what would appear circumvent what is norms and practices within the aviation industry around the use of humanitarian flights. Humanitarian flights are for emergency purposes. It's to make sure that we are able to prioritize flights into particular spots, or to put them in the front of the line, per se, during emergency situations. And in this instance, we don't see that, and we believe that this action by Aeroflot is one that we're continuing to investigate, and have a great deal of disappointment in their use of the humanitarian designation.
Merci pour la réponse.
Thank you for the answer, but I'm still trying to. I don't feel like I've understood how Transport Canada identifies a flight as such. If I leave and Nav Canada can't know whether or not it's being declared before takeoff. I mean, how do you declare your flight to be a humanitarian flight and continue? Unfortunately, there's no time for the answer, so perhaps next time, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Backrack, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the officials for joining us today and answering our questions. I have some questions for NAV Canada, but I wanted to start with a question for Mr. Bertin. You were talking earlier about Russian exports to Canada and the various products, and I understand that Canada announced a ban on the import of crude oil products, but there aren't that many Russian crude oil products, if any, that at least recently have come into Canada. And as you noted, other petroleum products, other oil and gas products, do make up a significant percentage of Canada-Russia trade. So I'm just wondering if you can provide us with any insights as to why the government didn't place a ban on other petroleum products. If the goal here is to put pressure on Russia and make them feel economic pain, it would seem that targeting products they actually trade with us would be a more effective way to do that.
Yes, thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, given our remit over transportation undertakings, the issue of commodities really falls outside of our remit. I think it's probably a question that is best posed to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who leads on special economic measures. So unfortunately, I'm unable to provide you with a response to that question.
Okay, thanks. I'll direct that question elsewhere. Questions for NAV Canada, and some of these have been answered already around the timing of the NOTAM, the issue of the NOTAM and the flight Aeroflot 111. But I'm interested in picking up on these two subsequent flights that were diverted around Canadian airspace. And I'm wondering, obviously, for Flight 111, Canadian air traffic controllers advised the pilot that the ban was in place, that the sanctions were in place, and yet the flight continued through our airspace. For the subsequent two Aeroflot flights, American air traffic controllers told them to go around our airspace, and they complied. If anything, I would think that the following two pilots would be emboldened by the fact that the first pilot got through. What was different in what the Americans communicated to those Aeroflot pilots?
Well, the first thing, thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. But the first thing is that I'm not necessarily privy to the conversation that there was between those pilots, and I'm certainly not in a position to comment what the pilots were thinking at the time and the reasons why they did certain things. What I can share with you is that we did exactly the same thing with from an NAV Canada perspective with the two following flights than we had done for the initial flight, which is to advise or request the FAA to reroute the flights around our airspace. And the first pilot elected to go through, and the two other pilots elected to comply with the NOTAM and go around the airspace.
And can I assume that the difference in those circumstances will be one of the topics covered by the investigation?
I would have to direct that information to Transport Canada. But what I can share with you is it is our belief that the investigation in the NAV Canada actions were completed and that we were found that we did everything in compliance with published regulations and procedures and the authority that we had at the time.
Since the incidents on February 27th, have there been any further attempts made by Russian aircraft to enter Canadian airspace?
There has, in the sense that the flight plans were deposited. And just to give you a sign of how many, from the publishing of the NOTAM to around March 7th, there were 55 flights that were diverted around the Canadian airspace at the request from NAV Canada from the adjacent ANSPs.
And prior to the airspace closure coming into force, how many Russian flights would pass through Canadian airspace on a daily basis?
Well, you've got the, if you take from the numbers that I gave you, so from February 28th to March 7, 55 would have been the number. So I guess you can divide that by the number of days.
Okay. So I think there are a lot of questions around the ownership structures and the registration structures, both in application to the marine ban and the closure of our airspace. Many of the aircraft operated by Russian airlines are actually registered elsewhere. For instance, the aircraft used for Aeroflot Flight 111 is registered, I believe, in Bermuda. How is NAV Canada interpreting the connections to Russia in implementing this ban on flights over our airspace?
We have, as usual, very good communication, Mr. Chair, with Transport Canada. And Transport Canada are the ones that provide us with a lot of the information. There are some easy ones, as you could see in Aeroflot, and the Government of Canada has given us a list of aircraft that are registered and operated from Russia. But as you point out, NAV Canada does not have the tool to identify all the aspects of the NOTAM. For example, we have no information about who is actually sitting in the aircraft. So if there's Russians that charter an aircraft that is registered somewhere else, we count on Transport Canada to provide us that information in order to apply the NOTAM, something that has, in my opinion, worked very, very well with Transport Canada since the issuance of the NOTAM.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Girard. The next to Ms. Landsman. Ms. Landsman, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of the officials for making the time. I'd like to go back to the issue of the NOTAM. And perhaps you can clarify it for the committee. Does the issuance of the NOTAM at the time when it's issued signify the closure of the airspace? Is that the timing?
Can you confirm who the question's for? Is myself, I would imagine?
Sure.
So what I can share with you is that the NOTAM is intended, as I said in my opening statement, for thousands of pilots, whoever's in the air actually, to obey those NOTAMs in order to keep the airspace safe and secure. So in a sense that when the NOTAM is published, it is active immediately, and it requires all pilots to obey by the NOTAM. Now, there's, from an NAV Canada perspective, what I can add is there's time required between when the NOTAM is published and when it is operationalized. You have to understand that this is unprecedented action that the government took, something that I've personally been with the company for 33 years, and I have not seen something similar to that. So procedures that do not exist. And the aviation sector sector is a highly regulated sector, and it requires that we develop procedure according to a certain process and according to a safety management, a regulated safety management system where we have to identify risks and determine if any mitigations are required. In addition, we've got hundreds at any given time, hundreds of controllers sitting down in position that need to be taken off the positions and briefed on new procedure. So between the issuance of the NOTAM and the operationalizing of the NOTAM, there is a time required there. So directly to your question, as soon as the NOTAM is published, it is effective immediately, but it does take time to NAV Canada to brief and operationalize the procedure to go directly to
happens after, and frankly more about what happens before. Is it usual that all media, mainstream media, social media would say that the airspace is closed before this before the NOTAM is actually issued? Don't you find that confusing? Because I think that's what happened in the case of February 27th, where I believe that we had read about this as Canadians before any kind of notice to airmen was actually issued. And my concern is if you have to issue something quickly in an emergency to respond to an active threat, is NAVCAN prepared to do so?
I don't think it's my place to comment if it's confusing or not to the public at large. What I can tell you is that it was not confusing to NAV Canada what our authority was at the time and what needed to be done to operationalize the procedures.
So in that case, it would be totally normal that that Canadians at large would know about an airspace closure before any kind of notice to airmen is issued. Is that a usual case?
Again, I unfortunately have to repeat what I said. It is not my place to comment on what's usual or not usual. What I can tell you is that as soon as we got the NOTAM, we knew what we needed to do, and we worked with the government in order to get the proper authority to operationalize the NOTAM and implement it as fast, as efficiently, and most importantly, as safely as possible.
Well,
Mr. Chair, I wonder if I can just add to that. The notice is for the crews that are operating in and around the area that's impacted. And I'll give an example. We issue NOTAMs quite frequently. An incapacitated aircraft on a runway, lighting issues on another runway, potential construction on another runway. So there could be many instances where if you had an incapacitated aircraft on a runway, yes, many individuals are aware of that. They're very aware. The NOTAM hasn't been issued yet. Individuals in that airspace are working around it. It could be reported in the media as well, and a NOTAM might follow it. It's the instrument of information to crews. The decision to issue the NOTAM has already been made behind that. Now, NAV Canada and Transport Canada work very quickly. We can issue NOTAMs fairly quickly. I think in this case, we were speaking about the potential of issuing a NOTAM even before earlier into the weekend, so that the system was ready if the decision was taken. But again, the NOTAM is the notice. It's the poster to tell everyone that this action is being taken, but the decision making behind it can occur, and individuals can absolutely be aware of that notice that will be coming out before the actual notice is available.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Thank you very much, Ms. Landsman. Next, we have Ms. Koutrakis. Ms. Koutrakis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I'd like to explore a little bit more about the cooperation between various governments and transportations. So how does Transport Canada collaborate and coordinate with the National Defence, the Department of National Defence, and the Canadian Armed Forces to ensure situational awareness of the Canadian airspace? And I'm not sure who can answer that. I don't know if it's Transport Canada or NAVCAN, but anyone that can add some comments or an answer to that would be appreciated.
Mr. Chair, I'll speak to that initially. So if we do find that there's a situation where we feel that there is a threat to Canadian airspace, a threat to individuals operating within Canadian airspace or Canadians themselves, we will liaise through a protocol with our Canadian Forces colleagues to take decisions on what may be required to address that threat. And NAV Canada would be helping us inform potential areas where the threat is located, but they will also be part of our conversation to make sure that we're able to address that threat effectively.
And how proactive, have we taken any proactive measures for Canadian transportation or navigation authorities to make Russian aircraft operators aware of Canada's February 27, 22 ban?
So I would say the notice to airmen, the NOTAM, is that awareness mechanism that Russian-owned, operated, leased, controlled aircraft, and now Belarus aircraft are the same, are banned. It's the responsibility of aircrew to be aware of the NOTAM. That is the international norm, to be aware of NOTAMs that are part or that may impact their flight plan. And we also are aware that Russia is very aware of the action that we've taken, because the day following they referred to that ban by banning Canadian aircraft as well.
Thank you for that. And to what extent is the Government of Canada coordinating and working with the U.S. and European aviation authorities to track Russian-owned or operated aircraft, and more specifically to ensure that compliance with the various airspace bans is being done, carried through?
So leading up to our, Mr. Chair, thank you for that question. Leading up to the decisions, we were in contact with our international colleagues around actions that were being considered as well. That included colleagues within the European Union and the UK, as well as the United States. And also looking at potential language that may or may not be used to implement those bans. And we continue to, even in the case of the revisions to the NOTAM that we made late last week, continue to be in contact with our colleagues, because for the most part we try and streamline as best as we can, also keeping in mind our own sovereign decision making. We try and streamline it for air crews so that they're aware. So if there's a potential to align with international partners, we do so. You see that in the work that we've done through our conflict zone information office as well, trying to streamline the warnings that we have in and around the Ukraine and the 200 nautical miles around those borders.
And I'm sure many Canadians would be interested in my next question, although it may be deemed a little bit sensitive. But to what extent, if you can you describe how we defend against cyber attacks on critical transportation infrastructure?
So, Mr. Chair, I can start with that question and speak within the air sector. Over the last number of weeks, we've been informing our air sector colleagues of information coming out of other government departments around revising, ensuring that their cyber security plans are in place, that they've made adjustments if they feel that are necessary. We also have different information sessions that are being conducted by, again, other government departments with those sectors to make sure that those plans are in the best place possible to potentially respond to threats that may have surfaced as a result of different hostilities over the last number of weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Katrakis, and thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Prochainement, nous avons Mr.
Next, we have Mr. Barcelou Duval. You have 2.5 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question will be to Mr. Girard, and it's dealing more with detection systems That is to say, when a flight comes into Canadian airspace from abroad, generally speaking, I understand that there is a flight plan that would have been filed before their departure, so you should be aware of the arrival of that aircraft to manage its flight. So if there's no flight plan, if it's an aircraft that arrives from abroad, how do we operate? What is your role? And my other question at the same time is regarding detection systems of NAV Canada to be aware of an aircraft entering our airspace. Are they the same as Defence, or does Defence have its own parallel systems? So how is that managed? Well, I have to refer your second question to the Government of Canada. National defence systems may or may not be the same as those of NAV Canada. But as to your first question, I have to say that there are several kinds of flights that exist. So aircraft that are carrying passengers are usually what we call EFI mode. So they're instrument flights. And when you're flying by instrument, these are international standards, and the pilots have to have a flight plan. So I can tell you that it would be exceedingly rare to have an aircraft enter Canadian airspace without having previously filed a flight plan. But how would you react in those circumstances if there is an aircraft that enters our airspace and there's no known flight plan? Well, that would be VFR, visual flight, and they would ask for an EFI authorization. So at that point in time, we'd identify the flight, we would ask them what they want to do, and we would give them an authorization according to the capacity we have at that moment in time because of the surrounding flights. In other words, if there's an aircraft that leaves Kingston, as an example, and wants to have an EFR authorization, we look at the surrounding flights, and according to our capacity, we would give them that permission. But I can tell you that in the case of the Aeroflot flight or other flights that are crossing the airspace, the vast majority, and in fact everyone, I would say, 99.99% of the people will already have tabled a flight plan. Thank you very much, Mr. Barcelo-Duval, and thank you, Mr. Girard.
Mr. Bachrach, you have the last round of 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pick up where my colleague left off with Mr. Girard. As part of previous studies, this committee has heard about staffing shortages at NAV Canada. And assumedly, the closure of Canadian airspace would put additional responsibilities and duties onto NAV Canada personnel. Does NAVCAN have adequate resources to monitor Canadian airspace, particularly in remote regions such as the Arctic?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. So let me make two statements. The first one being that staffing has absolutely nothing to do with this monitoring and implementation of NOTAM. NAV Canada at the time and since then has the staff required to implement and enforce the NOTAM.
Okay, thank you. And then to the Transport Canada officials, we've had several questions at this meeting about the various ownership structures, both in relation to the shipping ban and the closure of Canadian airspace. And I'm wondering if someone can speak to thresholds and definitions, given that the ownership structures, both in the aviation industry and in the shipping industry, can be quite complex when it comes to the countries involved. Are there certain percentage ownerships that trigger thresholds? Is this a discretionary process, or are there specific definitions that come into play in enforcing these various sanctions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to get the answer started off. Perhaps my colleagues would supplement on the air side. But from a marine perspective, we are talking about measures that were taken under the Special Economic Measures Act. In that act and in the regulation on the vessel ban, the legal terminology is one with respect to in whole or in part. I can offer that in terms of clarification. However, how that ultimately comes to sort of be dealt with within the context of a decision is something that I would have to leave to my colleagues at Global Affairs Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach, and thank you very much on behalf of all committee members to our witnesses for appearing today and for your time. It's always greatly appreciated. This concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much.